Welcome to another episode of the Pierce Brothers. I'm Jake. I'm here with Dad. Today we're going to be talking about things not to do to your classic Smith & Wesson. We're going to mostly focus on shooting jacketed bullets through it. So, okay, before we get going with the video, guys, be sure to check out our Patreon and our YouTube membership. Those are two great ways to support our channel if you like our content. And again, just if you can't support us that way, just, you know, subscribe, like, comment, share. Any support you can give is greatly appreciated. I don't know, Dad, you want to take it off from there?
Sure. So I kind of brought an array of guns here. We're gonna talk about a little bit of the history of pre-war Smith & Wessons is what we're primarily going to focus on here. But I brought some ammo boxes and so on to talk about that a little bit, because the history of the ammo at the era with the gun is really important. But you know, the real classic Smith double actions began with the old K-frame, the military and polices. That was actually a black powder cartridge. The 38 Smith & Wesson Special was actually a black powder cartridge originally, but so naturally it went with lead bullets, pure lead bullets. And but I focus mainly on the end frames today, because that's what we kind of have the biggest love for. Although we got some great K-frames, but like the very first Smith end frame was, of course, the New Century, or what people commonly call the triple lock. It was the first model hand ejector. Here's an example, a target model. They, of course, were chambered mostly in 44 Special, and they were chambered in other calibers, but 44 Special was introduced with that and is the most common caliber in the triple locks. Great guns, wonderful guns, classic guns. They actually got their name because they lock in the front of the cylinder at the crane with the locking device here. You can see the insert from this side, but they also lock at the end of the ejector housing in the underlug of the barrel, and of course they lock in the breech of the frame. So 3 locking spots. It did not add any strength to the gun. I've read that so many times. It did not add any strength to the gun. It just increased the durability of the gun. The Brits actually,
because of the 4-inch barrel here.
Yeah, very rare.
But like Dad was saying, the British actually used some of these in World War I. They quickly realized they did not like the shrouded ejector round housing, because in World War I it was an extremely hostile environment towards firearms, and mud, sand, dirt had a tendency to get in the shroud here, and your gun wouldn't lock up, you know. So that's where second model hand ejectors kind of came into being.
Yeah,
so
for comparison, they of course did not have that underlug. They just simply had a locking device here and at the breech. The lock in the crane area was completely eliminated, and it helped the gun be a little bit more durable in sand, mud, you know, bad conditions.
And people really don't realize how bad the conditions were in World War I. There were certain battles where people were confirmed to have been killed by drowning in mud. So, I mean, I could see where that would certainly be a liability. So,
yeah. So, going back to the original 44 Special ammunition, if I can find some here. There's
cool.
And I brought another one here. It was all lead bullet. 246 grain was the most common bullet weight. It was, of course, in a lead round nose configuration. This one actually had a copper wash on it when they were trying to help control fouling some. But it was there's an original early Winchester box, but you know, it was actually a black powder round originally. Most people don't realize that, but of course it was lead bullet. Now, the first use of jacketed bullets in these began with the model 1917. Where did we put that one? Right there.
Yeah.
This is a commercial version, by the way, but you know, a little history there. The military adopted the model 1911 at the beginning of, well, a few years prior to World War I. Officially, I think in 1911, it was officially adopted, but when they started to go into World War I, they didn't have enough guns to arm all the troops, and so Colt and Smith & Wesson both built special double-action revolvers that could handle the 45 auto. What's interesting is that the 45 auto cartridge headspace is on the case mouth, so it would drop in, and you could put all of them in and shoot it. but you could not, it couldn't eject them because there was no rim. It was a rimless case. And so you couldn't rim them or could not eject them. So the military used half moon, and I'm not sure if they used full moon clips at all.
Just half moon.
Just half moon.
Yep.
So that was kind of what I thought. But they were 3 in a circle that they popped in, and they dropped 3 in at a time, and that allowed them to positively eject those cases. But what we have here, and this is important, we had Colt Smith & Wesson revolvers that were made to fire .45 auto as an improvising. So they needed guns to arm their troops, handguns, and that's why the 1917 Smith was set up, which is really basically a second model hand ejector. And that's actually when Smith & Wesson began heat treating cylinders, because they needed the extra strength to handle the higher pressures of the .45 ACP, which was 21,000 psi as we know it today. But that's kind of when that triggered that result of the heat treated cylinders. But here's what's important: a lot of those guns, that forcing cone would wear out, I mean, within 3,000 rounds, typically to 5,000 at the most, from being shot with jacketed bullets. The barrel stills were not really that hard. They weren't that erosion resistant, so that the barrels would shoot out. Jake had a 1917 Colt years ago, and it was a pretty nice gun, but it was shot out, and there was nothing we could do to make that thing shoot. It was just done.
It was all over the place.
Yeah, you'd shoot and the bullet would go that way. But yeah, that was a very common thing, but nobody thought anything about it because, again, it was an improvised weapon for wartime use. Now, what's interesting, Jake grabbed this box here. By 1922, about 1921-22, they developed a .45 auto rim, which is basically 45 ACP, but with a rim, and of course crimped, and a lead bullet, specifically for 1917 revolvers. And so it would eject normally. The lead bullet allowed the barrel to last a long time. This being a commercial version, important factor. And this gun, of course, this is a very early gun, but it shoots extremely well even after all these years. And so again, that was an era when jacketed bullets were in their infancy, and handguns that manufacturers knew they worked fine. But I'm gonna take a second here and read something before we move on to the Magnum era.
Well, there's one other point I was gonna make, and this doesn't really pertain to the Smith & Wesson revolvers, but Elmer Keith, when he was shooting 1911s a lot, and this is pre-World War I era, he would get a case of ammo and a new barrel from his friend, and he'd replace the barrel and then shoot the case of ammo. And it's kind of the same thing with 1911 barrels. It's just, you have replacement barrels that, for the most part, were a drop-in fit, and right. So it's no big deal if you wear out the barrel shooting jacketed bullets in a 1911,
Yeah.
So,
and one thing before we go further too, I have to chuckle at this because we did a video that was really controversial here just a short time ago on shooting .38 specials and 357s. And there was a lot of comments. It was funny. The real shooters that are hand loaders and really savvies, they got the video 100% because they watched it to the end. We got a lot of negative comments from people that commented on it that obviously did not watch the video and they especially didn't watch it to the end. And I never said you couldn't shoot .38s in a 357 or anything else, or that it was a safety issue or anything. I never said anything of that nature, but people took offense to it and acted like I was an idiot. That's okay. I'm pretty thick-skinned.
Well, and then there also, we had comments of people saying, well, there's not many people that shoot 100, 200, 300, 400, 500 yards. I'm like, you take a look around here,
yeah,
and we shoot longer range all the time with handguns, and it's not like we're at an indoor range shooting handguns at the 300-yard range,
Yeah, well, you could tell the comments from the east versus the west. It really was that decisive.
Yeah.
But it was, the other thing is, like, we ride horses a lot and so on, and carrying a rifle on a horse, if you're hunting, that's one thing, but a lot of times you're on a young, inexperienced horse, and carrying a handgun is really all you do, and all of a sudden you got a coyote out there 150, 200 yards, whatever it is, and it doesn't mean you can hit him, but you can usually make it hot for him, and oftentimes you do hit him too. But one thing I wanted to clarify, where I was going with that video or that comment, was that I don't know where to begin on this. A lot of guys really didn't understand the different parts of a revolver. One guy made the comment, he said, well, if the bullet sets in the throat, the cylinder can't turn. It's like, no! Okay, so to be clear, a revolver has 6 chambers. Each chamber has a throat. The throat is on the ball end, as Smith & Wesson calls it, of the cylinder. So that's where the throat is. So it's got 6 chambers and 6 throats contained in the cylinder. The forcing cone is cut in the back of the barrel. So the forcing cone is just as it indicates, it's a cone. Let me get a flashlight on that, Joe. It's a cone that allows that bullet to enter the barrel without shaving and helps guide the bullet into the barrel. The barrel propper is actually the part of the barrel that protrudes back from the frame. So some guns have a barrel propper that's very fully supported. A good example would be this Freedom Arms. Look how short that barrel propper would be in that gun. So the terminology was such that people really didn't understand what they were even responding to. One guy said, well, if the bullet's in the throat, your cylinder can't turn. It's like, no, we're not even on the same page. So anyway, the reason I bring that up is that the forcing cone will show erosion first on a jacketed bullet, or when it's beginning to wear out, whether it's from cast bullets, jacketed bullets, whatever. Now we have to inject here just briefly a minute. Actually, before we get there, let me finish something about the Magnum era, then we'll get to a funny little story about Porter here. But so up until 1935, we pretty much had lead bullets and everything. In fact, I brought along a Colt single action to verify the same thing. Here's a shortly after the turn of the century Colt, and vintage ammo has always been lead bullets. So it just, it's just the way it is. The barrels lasted a long time on those, as long as you kept them clean, and the barrels were soft in the black powder era. But you can see lead bullets in this stuff, and yeah, it's many of our comments don't just apply to Smith & Wesson today. It's pretty much all revolvers from vintage era. And I don't want to get into the metallurgy of barrels too much, because that becomes a very convoluted discussion as metals changed and improved and got better. But I'll say that even if you got a vintage Ruger Blackhawk, an old 3-screw in 44 mag or 357, man, use jacketed bullets sparingly in it. Use cast bullets. But we'll get to more on that in just a minute. So the Magnum era, of course, the Smith & Wesson introduced the 357 Magnum in 1935, and that kind of came about. Where did I put it? There we go. There's the 3844. The 3844 Outdoorsman was a wonderful gun. In fact, a lot of people talk about the extreme quality of the triple lock, which is true. That was a very finely made revolver, and the registered Magnum. But I'll tell you what, I've got a number of 3844 Outdoorsmans in pre-war and post-war versions, and they are just beautifully finished and fit. And I don't know that Smith & Wesson's ever made a finer revolver, actually, in overall quality than that, built in the 30s, of course. And ultimately, the experiments with this, there was actually a 3844 load that was a heavy-duty load, or a heavy load specifically for end-frame Smiths. And then there was guys like Elmer Keith and Phil Sharp and other guys that experimented that got Doug Wesson thinking, that we're leaving a lot of power on this. In fact, they took these guns and they ran them up over 40,000 pounds of pressure in them, shot hundreds, even thousands of rounds in them, and they realized, okay, we got to move forward with a new cartridge. And that ultimately led to the introduction of the 357 Smith & Wesson Magnum, or what people today call the registered Magnum. These are very, very collectible, highly sought after guns. I just brought a couple of 2 or 3 out of my own collection today. Here's a 5-inch gun. Here's an 8 3/8" gun, which is kind of a rare barrel length in them. Most of them were 8 3/4 inch. Here's actually kind of a little bit of a historical gun that is a 6.5 inch. Of course, it's got the humpback hammer and so on. But these guns were beautifully made. Every gun was custom built with various features that the customer wanted. The factory, even though it was the middle of the Great Depression, they found out quickly that there was such demand for these guns that they dropped the registration number and just began producing them as a standard straight up gun. You could still custom order them, but they dropped the registration feature on them. But these were wonderful guns. But part of the point I'm making here is that if you go back to if you think we're full of baloney here, before you take that position and comment accordingly, I'm just going to read a couple of things. In the lid of the 357 Smith & Wesson registered Magnum boxes that they came in, it stated about ammunition. It said ammunition, factory loaded smokeless revolver cartridges. The reason they specified smokeless was, again, it would shoot .38 specials. The factory recommended it, but there was still black powder ammo out there from .38 specials. But it goes on, it says, with plain lead bullets are recommended. And jacketed bullets have already been out by then. So plain lead bullets recommended. Smith & Wesson 357 cartridges are specially designed for this arm. It also chambers .38-44 Smith & Wesson Special and the .38 Smith & Wesson Special. And then to take this one step further, another box from the post-war era stated, factory loaded smokeless powder cartridges with plain lead bullets are recommended. Experience shows that metal patched, in other words jacketed bullets, are frequently responsible for barrel trouble. And then if I take this quote right here from this old 3840 Smith & Wesson box that's right on the lid, right here you can see it. Here, Jake, you read it.
Okay.
I can read it, but I don't want to show off.
Ammunition and guarantee. This gun is guaranteed against any defects in material or workmanship when used exclusively with factory-loaded .38 Special caliber cartridges of standard or high velocity. It is primarily designed for ammunition with plain lead, lubricated bullets, and we recommend this type of cartridge to maintain utmost accuracy for the maximum length of time. Metal jacketed bullets may be used, but have a tendency to cause greater barrel wear. So right there, right from Smith & Wesson.
Yeah, this is not the Pierce brothers' opinion. Now, I got to step aside a second and say, okay, here's the deal. And Jake was loading ammo over here the other day, and he says, Dad, you ought to bring these just to show people, because I've got these jugs full of primers. And, you know, I don't do high volume shooting like Joe or these guys that go out here and burn 1,000 rounds of 9mm just making a video. I do a ton of experimenting. In fact, I've done a lot of load development for factories, a lot of consultation with various gun companies. And so I'm experimenting all the time. And these big, huge kegs of primers I have, if you will, spent primers, are proof of that. They're not... Anyway, but I didn't bring them. But here's the point I'm making is, yes, I'm a shooter. I shoot a lot, but I also have an extensive amount of experience with this stuff, and particularly revolvers. I mean, I love rifles and lever guns and all that other stuff, but revolvers are really a passion to me, and experience is a great teacher. I've been shooting them longer than I care to admit. But now I gotta pull Porter in here for just a minute and tell a little bit of a funny story. But when he was what? Come on in, Porter, a second. And when he was what? Probably 13, maybe?
Yeah, I was 13.
13. I gave him the Smith & Wesson Model 28-2 from the 1970s, and the thing was like brand new. And so of course I helped him get some ammo, and he had a Marlin lever gun, 1894 at the same time, and I kept warning him, Port, don't shoot a lot of jacketed bullets in that. You know, kind of save them sparingly when you really want expansion or something. And you know, let's stick with the cast bullets. Your barrel life will last longer. Well, Porter being Porter, he'd go out and just blaze away, and next thing you know, he's loading more jacketed bullets and so forth. And Joe, get a good close up of that forcing cone. I'm going to put some light on that if it helps you at all.
And you can see the top strap there.
Some cutting on the top strap.
Yep.
Now he shot a lot of swage lead and cast bullets in this as well. But and while you're up close on that, by comparison, here's a gun that's actually had more rounds through it than that. And this gun's an 05 pre-model 27, which is the same thing as a model 28. I actually have a pair and a spare of those in 5-inch barrels. That gun's been shot a lot, like a lot more than Porter's Model 28. And you can see some erosion, but it's not significant. The gun still shoots extremely well. And I have put probably less than 100 rounds of jacketed ammo through that gun. So, and yet it's still barrels perfectly fine. So, and they've been mostly Magnum, full power Magnum rounds. The other thing, and we won't touch on this too much today, but the type of powder even has an effect on how much erosion goes
All
into
powders
a barrel.
are really hard on them.
Spherical powders, typically in Magnum revolvers, wear a barrel faster than does extruded powders like 2400 or similar powders. We don't want to get into that too much today, but we're mainly focusing on the jacketed bullet thing. And those also that wanted to show something here briefly. Because I know there's going to be a lot of viewers on here that are either not hand loaders or that this is a totally new concept to them. But here's a swage lead bullet. This is a Hornady. It's got a little bit of antimony, but it has a BHN hardness of about 6, I think. Pure lead's about 5. Hornady mixes a little bit of antimony with that. Here's a plain base bullet, so it's what would normally be considered a hard cast bullet, and this one's got a BHN of about 12 or 13. Most commercial cast bullet companies today cast about with a BHN of about 15 at least to 20, even up to 22. Here's one that's again about a 12 or 13 BHN, but it's got a gas check. You'll see a little copper cup on the back. So those will wear a barrel faster than a plain base, but nowhere nearly as much so as a jacketed bullet. A jacketed bullet, it goes way off the charts on the BHN. That's way harder. I have said for years and years, by my experience, and there's so many variables in this, but by my experience, that for every jacketed bullet you shoot, you can shoot 20 to 50 cast bullets with the same amount of wear. So it's like, wow, that's really sobering when you think about, if you're going to put 5,000 rounds through a gun. I've got guns that are big bores, that barrel breech looks brand new still, and they've got 20,000 rounds through them, and there's really no wear. Now they're typically lower pressure rounds than the 357, but that's a very real thing. So especially in vintage guns, the barrels were softer, they were designed for lead bullets, so just keep that in mind.
Like mine here, I'm gonna guess I have about 5,000 rounds of the jacketed through it, and probably 5,000 rounds or so of the cast bullets.
And swage lead.
And all of that wear pretty much came from the jacketed, because I was an idiot.
Yeah. One, it doesn't shoot as good now either as it used to.
I shot most of that 5,000 rounds in the first year and a half I had it, and of the jacketed, and then about 14 and a half to 15 years old, Dad switched me over to a different bullet that I started using a
cast with a gas check.
Yeah, the gas check. Sorry, I was just drawing a blank there. I started shooting gas checks instead, and it seemed to wear the barrel a lot slower. But obviously, the actual overall barrel condition, it's pretty worn out. It quit shooting as well and stuff. So I kind of just keep this as just like a, just whenever I want to have fun for a minute shooting gun. But it's not my everyday carry gun anymore. So. Dad was with me one time, and I shot a coyote at 250 yards or so with it, and offhand. And so when we talk about shooting stuff at long range with handguns, we're really serious. We don't shoot at 20 or 30 feet. We shoot at 200, 300 yards type of thing. It doesn't mean you always hit them, but you always try to.
The funny thing about this, Elmer Keith thought this very same thing, talking long range shooting. His whole life, people didn't believe him, and yet the funny thing is, if you were savvy with international handgun metallic silhouette shooting back in the 70s, man, some of those guns, they literally were shooting 1 to 3 inch groups at 100 yards, and metallic silhouette, you're shooting out to roughly 220 yards or 200 meters, and many guys shot perfect scores those, and you had to have enough power to knock over those still heavy rams at 200 meters. And but if you'd shoot those targets and stand them up and overlap the groups, seriously, a lot of those guns, literally at 200 meters, you were getting 3 to 2.5, 3 inch groups to 5 inch groups, and so. Yeah, long-range cisgunning is a very real thing, and I'm not even prepared to tell you about the really ultra-long range because people won't believe you. But the FBI tested the registered magnums when they adopted that in 3.5 inch barrel. They tested those out to 600 yards, and found that they got more than 50% hits on a body silhouette. Was it the B-52? Isn't that what they call that? And Ed McGivern, it's in his book, as well as what he did, along with Dick Tinker and others. But anyway, and Elmer Keith, by the way. But
nowadays you have all these FBI boys and military boys that, if handgun's only good for 20, 30, 40 feet tops, and it's like, well, okay, whatever you say, buddy.
Well, the FBI's thing at that time was, okay, if an agent gets caught out at long range by a rifleman, he's pinned down, can he make it hot 400, 500, 600 yards on that man with return fire? Yeah. And actually they did that with the Colt single action in the military way back in the black powder days. They were trained to lay their horses down, hide behind the horse, and shoot at distances of 500 yards with a single action Colt. And the accuracy that the military got was incredible. But that's a whole nother subject. But I was going to insert a couple things. We don't want to make this too long.
Yeah, I've got one more comment too.
Go ahead.
So I one other thing. So if you look at Porter's barrel, it looks bright and shiny still. So if somebody's looking at the barrel condition, like, right, that's a really good bore. There's right, no pitting. It looks bright and shiny, but you really got to focus on the back end of the barrel. Of course, we already got close-ups of that.
The bullet to cant too much entering that rifle.
Yeah. Well, and the point I was going to make is I bought a pre-model 27 with a 3.5-inch barrel. It was kind of a rougher gun. This was probably 5 or 6 years ago, and I was kind of didn't really look the barrel over too well, and I was like, it looks pretty decent. But when I get home and stuff, we shoot.
Horse and cone was
the gun's pretty much done. Like, it had been shot out, and just to give me an idea of how much wear there was on cylinder end shake was so bad that it was bottoming out on the barrel, and we had to put like 15,000 shims on it, or 20,000 cinch of shims, something like that. It was some ridiculous number. And that's just how much that gun had been shot, and it had just been worn out, And of course, top strap cutting was pretty bad on it, and yeah. So then last point, I think Dan might be hitting on this, but Elmer Keith with his model, his 44 Magnum, Smith & Wesson 44 Mag, never put a jacketed bullet through it.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
Until I guess a jacketed bullet had never been put through until recently when it was getting sold, and some YouTuber was out there shooting jacketed ammo through it.
Yeah, I was cringing. I was cringing. Yeah, Elmer. Of course, I didn't.
Go ahead and reach there, Dad.
And this is the one other thing. So, if you've got a revolver and you go out and shoot 50 rounds a year or 100 rounds a year, you'll probably never notice it in your lifetime.
Yeah, exactly.
And
yes.
If you got 30 different Smith & Wesson revolvers and you just kind of alternate shooting, you'll probably never notice a difference.
Yeah. So this here is a pre-model 29. It's one of the first ones made, and as you can see, this is very, very early ammunition. In fact, I still have part of the pre-production lot number of ammunition from this, but it was a 240 grain lead bullet with a gas check. And factories ultimately decided that because of the ease of manufacturing jacketed bullets, they finally kind of made the switch over. And they just accepted the fact that, if we get a gun with a worn out barrel, big deal, we replace the barrel, right. And of course they improved barrel steels at that time and so on. But back when I used to shoot double actions a lot, this is a pair of guns I used a lot. This one actually, this one with the stag grips, I put stag on it after the second time, but I'd rebuild the gun, take the end shake out and so on. But ultimately the barrel on that got completely washed out, and I sent it back to factory, and they set the barrel back for me. And as you can see, if you look here a minute, this one's not been set back. If you line those up, you can see how much shorter that barrel is. They're both
hard in the video to see that, but you can see it in person.
You can see it. Yeah, and then I did it a second time. So I set it back a second time. But the second time, I was motivated because I shot this gun enough with full power loads that ultimately it sheared off the hammer pivot pin that goes in the frame, and that's a very difficult part to install yourself. I do a lot of Smith & Wesson revolver work. It's easier just to send it to the factory and let them do it. And they set the barrel back a second time at that time, and that's why it's so much shorter. The ejector rod's shorter, everything's shortened up on it. At that point, I put stag on it and said, This gun's just going to become a light duty 44 mag at this point. It's kind of got some sentimental value to it, but again, that just shows the nature of washing out barrels. By the way, this 29 is probably the one is probably my favorite of all of them. I got many of them, and it's likewise had less than 50 jacketed bullets through it, and you can see that barrel, very minimal wear on it, and it's had a lot of ammo put through it. So and actually no ball ammo or no spherical powders either, by the way. But yeah, that's some experiences. But I'm going to shift gears here a minute and talk about modern revolvers just briefly. You take there's a model 27. Well, it's actually a 627, so it's stainless. It's got all the funky shaped barrel and all the stuff. But they've got, stainless, generally speaking, is a little more resistance to erosion. But again, it's a modern gun. If you shoot a bunch of jacketed, if you got to shoot a bunch of jacketed, big deal. Send it back. They throw on a new barrel, no big deal. And Smith & Wesson will treat you very right on that, because they do a lifetime warranty on this new stuff.
It's like shooting a GP 100. It's like shoot jacketed, shoot lead. Doesn't matter.
Whatever. It's a tough as nails gun, and
and even then, the barrel quality with Smith & Wessons have increased a lot. And or I should say barrel durability, because these old barrels were really good quality. They're just
softer.
They're softer. Yeah. And for I'd say probably at least 5 decades, Smith & Wesson's barrels have been a lot more durable than they were.
Yeah, the
pre-war stuff.
They really began in the 60s and 70s to up the quality of the barrels, because the factories at that time, including Remington and Winchester,
were done producing lead bullets.
Well, they weren't done, but they began making jacketed soft point and jacketed hollow point bullets in factory ammo.
Well, and then you also look at the police departments were going to 357 Magnums in a big way.
Yep.
And their police training had increased a lot, and so guys were out there shooting a lot more than the cops were in the pre-war years. And just get through their training stuff, and I don't know, it just made sense.
Yeah. Well, and to show the forcing cone issue, as we're going to call it, when you go to the Freedom Arms, here's a Freedom Arms, a very early Freedom Arms Model 83, chambered in 454 Casull. I've had this gun for how many ever years? 40 years plus. And this was an experimental revolver, and they put it into production, but ultimately it has a small bushing that's like a ring, but it's threaded, and it threads into the back of the barrel, and there's a little lock screw right here on the side that locks that in place. They had problems with them coming loose at first. We ultimately changed that a little bit. I was working with Dick Casull at the time on that. Changed how that locked, and we solved the problem. This gun's probably had 6 or 8 different bushings in it, but the bushing was a special heat-treated steel that was just harder than diamonds, if you will, and it was to resolve the barrel erosion problem. And so now keep in mind that the 454 Casull's running 65,000 psi. It's got a impulse time about a third of what a 270 or a 300 Win Mag cartridge has, which there's a lot of pressure right there, and so the erosion's a very real thing. Plus, the factory ammo's always been jacketed, so it was a kind of a combination of all of it, and that's how they dealt with it. At some point, Freedom Arms realized the expense to do that far outweighed the guy that was going to shoot the barrel out of the 454, and so they have their field grade guns, and they don't have a lifetime warranty, but their premier grade does. So you shoot the barrel out, ship it to Freedom Arm, they just throw in a new barrel, and you're good to go anyway. So the reason I bring this up is that's to identify that Smith & Wessons are not the only ones that struggled with this problem. And I was going to show too, there's an original box of registered Magnum ammunition, or 357 Magnum ammo from 1935, and of course it was always lead bullet. And one of the reasons that Jake wanted to make this video is you take these registered Magnums, and a little shocking, but in round numbers, they're $10,000 guns each. And I shoot these, absolutely. Do I shoot them with jacketed? Never. Never. Not once. Never.
Don't do it.
So it's just a little bit of history on barrels and barrel life, forcing cones. There's a lot we didn't cover, would love to cover, but
that's another video for another day.
It is. Yeah. Joe's arm's probably getting tired. He didn't bring the tripod today, so he's having to hold the camera. And you're probably about ready to go to sleep by now.
Yeah.
So, any thoughts? Any last minute?
So I would say, don't shoot jacketed ammo through your classic
Older.
Smith & Wesson.
Yeah.
I really don't care if you shoot it through your newer
yeah.
production gun. You know.
Oh yeah,
So
yeah.
They're built for more abuse.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I'll leave it with one last thought though, just a tidbit of interesting history. Roy Jinks, the Smith & Wesson historian that was there forever, good friend of mine, and he told me the story. I was in his home in Massachusetts one time, and he told me the story. He was actually sitting at Daniel Baird Wesson's desk at the time, and he said, the Sharps Rifle Company sold Smith & Wesson a barrel making machine that and I don't remember the date, but it was around 1870-ish. And Roy knew the date, but he had the history there. So again, not 1970-ish, 1870, the old Sharps Rifle Company. And Smith & Wesson used that same machine, although they'd rebuilt it and upgraded it a little bit, clear until 1979. And what's interesting is you look at the barrels. I have a 44 Russian and old vintage black powder era Colts, or Smith & Wessons, excuse me, and you look at the rifling, and it looks identical to what you find on a Smith & Wesson 44 Magnum clear up to 1979. I mean, you look at it, it's the same rifling, and they used that same machine clear that long, which is kind of a cool piece of history. So, but we love Smith & Wessons, we really do. We just don't want to see the old guns get abused and shot to death and ruined, and especially when there's good alternatives with proper ammunition. So, okay, that's it.
Yeah, that's it.
All right. Thanks for joining us, and we will see you next time on the Pierce Brothers.